Hi, my name is William Honolulu Jr., and I am the General Manager of BlackUSA.news. BlackUSA.news is committed to making sure that our community gets information about candidates directly from the candidates. As part of our continuing coverage of Maryland's 2022 election season, we will be replaying shows featuring candidates for office. To find out which shows will be airing when, please don't hesitate to visit www.blackusa.news. Please also make sure that you like and subscribe to make sure that you get updates from Black USA News. Thank you.
My name is Martin Mitchell, and welcome to People Over Politics. This week, we have Richard Elliott. Thanks for joining us, Rich.
Thanks for having me as your introductory guest, Martin. And I can't wait to talk this week about issues affecting the state so we can give people a Prince George's perspective.
Absolutely, Rich. It's always great to have a fellow Prince Georgian on the show, and especially being my very first guest. You are introducing us to the show. So, Rich, you are a very bright person. You are a person that we know in Baltimore, we know in Prince George's, we know all over the state. But tell us who Richard is. Give us your elevator speech.
Sure. So I'm just a kid out of Prince George's County Public Schools. I went to University of Maryland, Baltimore County, American Studies, and got some training in education. After graduating, I was a paraeducator in Baltimore City over in Edmondson Village for a semester. And then I went to Johns Hopkins, got a master's in political science, and now I'm running for House of Delegates District 24. And I'd love to talk about myself, but just because this is the intro episode, we're going to focus on talking about the governor's race, AG race, the comptroller race, and some other grander races. And then later on in the election season, we can come back and focus on individual candidates and candidacies. Although I appreciate the questions. Of
course. They just have to know who you are, Rich, and generally just throw it out there. Because the thought is, we want people, within the political sphere to tune in, but we also want people who necessarily aren't tuned in, to tune in.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's why I thought you were a great first candidate, because I think that, you can explain information in a very digestible way.
Education background, bro. It's important.
Exactly. You can make it digestible, or you can make it, a little more lengthy if we need a thesis. If we need a thesis, you're right there for it. But one of the things, Richard, I know you're always the person for me to come to on Prince Georgian for what's going on in Prince George's. So, we're talking about it's election season. We have a lot going on, and a lot of people don't focus on what's going on in the county and the local races. So, what do you want to highlight? What are some interest items that you see?
Okay, so from interest, I'm going to go from what I think provide the most compelling and interesting races. We can start with the governor's race, but we'll get back to that because it's Prince George's focus. Within the county, I think County Council District 6, where there are several very qualified, very accomplished women running. Belinda Queen, who I am personally supporting, but I'm not encouraging through this broadcast for people to support. Walla Blige, Denise Smith, Barbara Holt-Streeter, Nakia Wright. I think that's the most contested race in the state because that district comprises multiple different legislative districts and goes from inside of the Beltway all the way to Woodmore. There's multiple reform candidates. There's multiple quote unquote establishment candidates. There's several candidates with big money. There's a candidate who's currently in office and has won multiple offices. So I think that District 6 race is probably one of the most interesting. That race overlaps with District 23, which is currently broken up into two districts, but is now going to become one, where again, there's several candidates, both at the delegate and the Senate level. You have Sylvia Johnson, Ron Watson, and there's rumors of a third and possibly even a fourth candidate for state Senate, where if either Watson or Johnson or any of the other candidates are elected, it would be either the first African-American or the first woman, or possibly the first African-American woman candidate ever elected to state Senate. There's never been a Black woman elected to delegate. So there's also a wide pool of several women candidates, along with, I think, two men, possibly three men, Monica Roebuck, Jocelyn Collins, Kim Taylor, January McKay, Remy Duyele. And then also for the men, there's the incumbent Marvin Holmes, along with Adrian Boifo is rumored to be running, a Bowie City Council member, and Kenan James, another man who has an impressive background. So I think that the District 23 at both the House and the Senate level is going to be very fascinating. And then also in District 26, where incumbent Senator Obie Patterson may or may not be running. Former Senator Anthony Muse, who I'm personally supporting, but again, I'm not encouraging people through this broadcast to support, is running. And there's also a third individual. He's a reverend. I forget his name off top, but he's also running. And then who knows what Jay Walker is going to do? Jay Walker may enter that race. And that also leaves a delegate race wide open with several candidates. So we have some interesting council races. We have some interesting delegate races. And this is all coming after, of course, we saw Edward Burrows, young man, roll with what, 72%?
Made history
72% in a special election primary against a former delegate, former county council member. So I think that what this indicates to me is this cycle is going to be very heavily focused on direct voter contact, on the door knocking, much less so on the kind of events and kind of slate methods that traditionally have predicted a lot of the outcomes. That's still going to play a part, but I think door knocking much more so than before will be a big factor.
Sure. I mean, I do agree with you that the machine probably won't play a part as a big part, especially in local level politics this year. Mm-hmm. But I mean, a lot of this is speculation, right, Rich? Because the filing, people still file, people still jump in, and some of the people you mentioned, haven't filed for these seats, right? So some of this is all left up to speculation. Yep. But I do believe that, as you said, District 6 will be very interesting, and District 23. There's a lot of candidates, and a lot of people who have been in the community, qualified people to run, and there's a lot of people who I'm not sure why they're running necessarily, but they have money or they have influence. I'm not saying names because they're I shouldn't say any names. The only thing I should say is run your race to the best of your ability.
Yes, right? I will say that this cycle will show there are certain candidates that need to spend $100,000 in order to reach 10,000 people. There are other people that need to spend $12,000 to do it. That's not to say any candidate or campaign is better or worse. It is, again, about running your race given the resources that you have. Sure.
And those two areas I know where the voters are very engaged. So the thought is like you can't just come out of left field. You're gonna have to be strong on certain policies and certain issues, and they're gonna have to see you in the community. So you can't just be a fly by night candidate in these areas. But on the other things, we have, of course, redistricting going on.
Oh, yes.
So, what are some of the most impacted areas in Prince George's County or in the state that we would see change?
Sure. So I'm going to talk mostly about the state maps and about the county maps rather than congressionals, because that's unnecessarily complicated for this program. In Prince George's, we actually recently had a circuit judge or a district judge throw out the old maps because, one, they were drawn under resolution rather than under statute. So they weren't technically laws, as they would never sign by the county executive. And given the enormous amount of outrage, I mean, it's rather striking that it was unanimous opposition to the redistricting plan. Nobody testified in favor of the redistricting plan, not a single soul. And thus those maps were thrown out, which reinforces the least change maps, which I actually find to be pretty solid. Some of the few changes are District 9 and District 8, I believe, stay exactly the same. District 4 gets a small part of Glendale, north of Glendale Heights. It's currently in District 3. I think District 5 stays roughly the same. District 6, I think, most of the districts stay basically the same, excluding District Heights gets moved from District 5 to 7, something like that, 7 to 5, 5 to 7. And a precinct in Glendale Heights that's in District 24 gets moved from District 3 to District 4. So that least change map, I think, is welcomed by many and I hope is upheld. For the state redistricting, we see a lot of interesting changes. So in the Bowie from South Laurel to Croom, rather than being two districts and a 23A, 23B is all united in a single district. So that has a pretty big change in terms of people will now have four legislators to call, including their senator, rather than only two or only one. In District 24, the district has been expanded northwards into the Hillmead, Glendale, Lanham area, leading up to near where Duval High School is. In District 22, the district has been cut further out towards New Carrollton and away from Lanham across Princess Garden Parkway. District 47, I think, stays roughly the same. Okay. But for the state maps, they brought welcome changes, at least in my perspective. I think that they were fairly fair changes. I think that the maps benefit Prince George's and benefit Black representation in the state. And while I am often a critic of the speaker, I would like to applaud Speaker Adrienne Jones for going out of her way to ensure that the Voting Rights Act was upheld by supporting the single-member district in Owings Mills. Before, it was a majority-minority area that was unable to elect a representative. That will almost certainly elect a Black representative. In the Southwest Baltimore County area, there's now a few more dual-member and single-member areas that can help to guarantee just minority representation. So I think that the speaker has actually done a phenomenal job on this specific aspect. And I think Donnie would agree, particularly when you look back at the 2002 redistricting, where individuals like Senator Mitchell were forced to face off against other incumbents. So I think this has been a rather smooth, fair, and transparent redistricting process for the most part. And I don't think that on the state level, it has been used explicitly to target candidates for removal from districts. I have not heard otherwise yet, but I think that it's been fairly fair.
Hi, my name is William Honolulu Jr., and I'm the host of the BlackUSA.news morning show and the president of the Grinding Gang Incorporated. The Grinding Gang is an organization that helps small business owners in the nonprofit and for-profit communities figure out how to make sense of all the noise. There's a lot of information out there, and sometimes it gets a little overwhelming. We help you develop business plans. We help you figure out what to do with a lot of the information you receive, and we also help you figure out how to become more profitable. We also host a variety of workshops. You can check out our next workshop on grant writing right here.
Okay. No. I mean, I know personally, the most of, at least locally, most of the uproar of what I've heard was for that Eric Olson.
Yes.
But outside of that, I know specifically in my district, in the District 21 area, there's not a lot of uproar, and they're generally pretty happy with the district. So I know Eric was one of the biggest.
He's like the lead plaintiff or something.
The biggest issues locally. So
yeah.
But outside of that, Richard, there's so much going on at the General Assembly. Mm-hmm. What are your things that you wanted to focus on? If there were 3 key points that you would tell people to keep their eyes on in Annapolis, because of course time is flying.
Mm-hmm.
So April 12th will be here before we know it.
So number one, I would say is the equity in cannabis legalization bill being introduced by the People's Champ Jill P. Carter. This bill has specific requirements that that a certain amount of the money generated from these programs goes specifically to communities that were targeted by the war on drugs, which they're using based on arrests. If you remember last year when we were proposing legislation, that was the metric we were trying to use, and I think that's the best measure you can use of trying to track that damage, of promoting small business licenses, promoting the social equity licenses, and generally promoting the most equity-laden cannabis plan in the country, because throughout the country, you've seen this go horribly awry through corruption, through sheriffs ending up with the money, through all kinds of other ways of ensuring that Black folks end up in prison and that white folks are profiting off of it. So I think that Senator Carter's legislation on that, when it's paired with the legalization referendum, which will certainly pass with likely, I think, 78% of the vote in a midterm.
Sure.
I think it would be much fairer and kinder for people to simply, legalize it now and immediately release people. But it appears they're going to do it through the referendum. So that's the first one. For the second bill is legislation from it's going to be from the Prince George's County Executive Administration regarding our school board. So they recently put forward a task force to make recommendations. And among those recommendations is one of Angela Alston-Brooks's original pledges, a fully elected school board. Now, I think I have some criticisms that this was not done earlier, that they were not able to do this when Ed Burrows and Belinda Queen and others are on the board. But moving to a fully elected board is going to resolve a lot of the...
What's your third point? I know you said pay attention to the school board, what's going on in Prince George's County. Pay attention to what's happening with cannabis, especially Jill P. Carter, the People Champs bill, and of course the referendum in general. So what's the third thing you want us to pay attention? And of course, I got some pushback on some of these things. But
yeah, there is a bill by Delegate Juanita Fisher from Prince George's County to create a amendment for the Maryland Constitution to guarantee the right to a healthy environment. What does this mean in practice? Let's say that you get sick because there's a landfill that poisons your water, and you want to do a lawsuit in order to, at the very least, sue for some kind of compensation so that you can continue to live. This would make it significantly easier to do such a lawsuit because you would have the Maryland Constitution at your back. So whether it be landfills or poisoned water or your neighbor dumping water on your porch, it would be significantly easier to protect yourself through legal action from environmental racism.
Okay.
And that bill has the support of, I believe, the Speaker, the Chair of the Environment and Transportation Committee, Kumar Barva, and I think also Senator Will Smith, if I remember correctly. That one, Will Smith might not be, but it has the support of several key players in Annapolis.
Hey, well, kudos to Delegate Fisher. Definitely a fellow Prince Georgian. And, that sounds like an awesome bill. Going on the first bill, we were talking about either HB1, which is the referendum that most likely is going to pass and be on the ballot in November. And we were also talking about SB, I think it's 0692, which is Senator Carter's bill. And I believe the name of that bill is the legalization and regulation, cannabis legalization and reparations to the war on drugs, or for the war on drugs Act. Yep. So, of course, as far as the referendum goes, we know that the Speaker of the House, she wants to leave it up to the people to decide the future of cannabis. As you and I and a lot of other people presume, the people and I will be in favor, probably well over the 50% in favor of cannabis for legalization for responsible adult use. So outside of that, of course, it's what comes with that, the framework, the criminal aspect, the economic as far as are we going to tax it, where does the revenue go, and also just the civil liberties, so a lot of that, of course, Senator Jill P. Carter looks to address in the bill. And the one question I have is, of course, just being critical is, I know that Senator Carter, she's an advocate for equity, diversity, and inclusion, and she's going to be one of the foremost advocates. But, it seems like there's some people within the coalition and just, some people that feel, there'll be other bills and competing in the Senate that, have the blessing of leadership and, even though they don't go as far as possibly Senator Carter's bill on equity, diversity, and inclusion, that these are the preference bills or the bills to perceive priority. Like, what exactly, would you respond in that aspect? Have you seen other bills, or just what are you hearing there?
So last session, we saw the bills from Delegate Lewis and Senator Feldman. Of those two bills, Delegate Lewis's was the more progressive, although still not ideal by our standards, but still was basically the one for the cannabis organizations, which would have had something like 1.5 ounces possession and a lot of the small pieces we're talking about. But the real critique, and I think this is a real part of the economic impact, is about the equity licenses where, like a cottage industry, any person could buy, sell, trade up to like $1,000 in a year and not even need to report it or do anything on it, because that would affect a lot of people's just economic well-being. Without including that, it's been a farce to pretend there's been any black business inclusion really in the current marijuana economy in the state of Maryland. And if we added the equity licenses, it would not really matter about the business. Like, one major piece we need to address, for example, is just the banking aspect, because you can't really get these loans backed by federal banks.
That's a federal thing. Yeah. I mean,
it adds a huge hurdle on the lending, which adds significantly more interest, more cost, especially for a black business owner. So I think the social equity licenses will be maybe the most meaningful part outside of the criminal justice restorative aspects, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And a lot of these are federal issues in which we know, hey, I'm a point on Biden for a little bit. Like, he can change some of these things with a sweep of a pen.
Mm-hmm.
But, a lot of these are federal issues. And the federal banking issue, of course, I'll talk to Ms. Wiseman, hope at some point. And one of the things, we will talk about is like, how difficult it is to be, a legal cannabis business, legal cannabis hemp business, and where a lot of times you're not able to bank regularly. Mm-hmm. You have to deal in cash, and, the thought is you don't have the same security as, a lot of these like name brand legal businesses. So yeah, you're completely right about that. And we need to make sure that home growth happens. We need to make sure that, we allow a good amount of cottage business licenses, mm-hmm. because, that was a sticking point last year between the House and the Senate bill, the amount of cottage business licenses that we would allow. And the thought is like, not everyone has $1 million to start a dispensary, or $250,000 or $300,000 to, get a license to actually go forward. Because of course, getting a license is just one step.
Right.
Of
just to apply for a license and potentially not even be able to get the money back. Absolutely.
But of course, one of the other things we talk about is you talk about the school board. The school board has been a tumultuous issue as long as, I've been paying attention in Prince George's County politics.
Since you were in the schools.
Sure. Since I've been in the schools, but definitely since I've been paying attention for the last decade or so. Mm-hmm. And not to say it's the most contentious now, because I think, under Mr. Baker, we had some contentious moments. But I will say that right now it was a pretty contentious moment. And, there are bills, out there to address what's going on in the House. But I do think, I'll say right here and now that I do think that, I'm not going to say I applaud her, but I do think that Angela should live up to her full elected promise. Mm-hmm. And I do think a lot of people will support this fully elected promise, because I think that some of the discord has come between appointed and elected not being on the same page. So the thought is, I think that people are smart enough to choose their representatives.
If you're smart enough to pick your county executive, I think it's fair to say you're smart enough to pick your school board member. That's an opinion, though. It's just an opinion.
Absolutely. That's fair. That's fair. And of course, the other thing you talked about was the school board. Then you also talked about Fisher's bill. Do you think that is the most, or do you think that rounds out number 3, or do you think that there is anything else that we should be paying attention to?
We could just talk about environmental package as a whole. I mentioned that one because I think that legislation is almost certain to pass this year. And I think that might actually be a first. Maryland Democrats usually aren't the first at doing stuff. This might be a first.
I agree.
Further, there's the Climate Solutions Now package introduced by Senator Pinsky.
That's a
which in essence, you could call the baby Green New Deal of Maryland, that would have things like they would have money for creating industries and retrofitting. and a whole lot of other efforts that we really don't need to go into details on the call.
No, sure.
That package is going to be introduced most likely as a bill and separately as a series of bills. I would much rather this year, like last year, be introduced as a bill so it has the possibility of passing, because I think that while it's not all that we need, it puts us on a start considering how to protect Maryland's future in climate crisis. And I think is one of the bigger steps I think a state in the country is going to be able to take, to be frank.
Huh. Okay. Well, Rich, I appreciate you. And before you leave, I wanted to do something. Of course, I wanted to highlight some events we had coming up, but just getting in to know you, right? It's a what I call like a lightning round. So I'll ask you a few random questions, right, Rich? And you just give me your best answer.
Sure.
Best Prince George's County executive.
Wayne Curry.
Hey, that's fair. I appreciate it. That's fair. Okay.
For legend Wayne Curry, for living here is probably Jack Johnson, to be honest.
Okay. Hey, that's fair. That's fair. I would say, are you a Coke or a Pepsi type of guy?
I just drank a, yeah.
Oh, okay. Hey, see, and that's brand. I would say the second thing is, are you a fan of go-go music?
I don't know how you could be on this program and not be. Are you allowed to be on this program and not be?
Yeah, the people need to know.
Of course. If you are not a fan of go-go, you should not be allowed on this broadcast.
Well, hey, this is also, I will say, being streamed, from Be More News, right? So at the end of the day, Baltimore is close enough, but they like their house music. They do like their house music.
It needs more drums. Doesn't have anywhere close to enough drums.
All right, absolutely.
You need like 4 layers of drums, and you're good.
Absolutely. And the one thing I would say is, Wale going to be at Broccoli Fest? What are your thoughts? Is he going to be there or not?
I don't know, because I don't do concerts anymore or
well, he's saying he's not going to show up. There's not enough local talent. So you have the word on the street, and that's why I asked Rich.
It's not from Wale, but if I were him, I'd show up, I guess. If he says there's no local talent, show up and be the local talent.
Sure. And that's fair. I appreciate you for showing up. One thing, I hope I see you next Friday at the Gary Chambers event.
Chambers.
Yes, so I'll be hosting Gary Chambers at Marion, Maine. And of course, as we mentioned, we'll be talking to the owner, Hope Wiseman. She is a dynamic person. She is one of the first Black dispensary owners in the state of Maryland, and first Black owned and woman owned, and probably the youngest dispensary owner in the state of Maryland, but also, in the United States. So, of course, someone,
and a Glendale resident.
Yeah, exactly. And she lives in his district. So, of course, we're going to have Richard back. You're going to get to hear more about Richard. And as I was saying, Richard, Marion, Maine, 6 to 8, February 11th. And we'll also be after party in DC. So, yeah, we're going to be relaxing. We're going to be kicking back at Union Oyster Bar. Come check us out. And as I will say, we will have Hope next. So we're going to continue the conversation on what's happening with pot. People over politics, join us.
Free the tree.
Free the tree.